learning of Laf Gemara. This is Sunday's Daf. We're up to Daf Pei Beis. In the Mishnah, we learned an argument. If you only purchase 2 trees, according to the Meir, you get the land with the trees. But according to the Rabbanon, you don't get the land with the trees, just the 2 trees. But because the trees belong to you, anything that grows out of the trunk of the tree belongs to you. But anything that grows out of the ground, out of the roots of the tree, belongs to the owner of the ground. What we also said is one benefit to the person who bought 2 trees, that if the branches extend further out, we don't cut the branches. The owner of the field cannot cut the branches, because since the guy doesn't have any land, and what you sold him was the right to have trees, and the trees include the branches, no matter how far they extend. Says the Gemara, we're up to the Pei Beis Amud Aleph. Higdili, if the branches grew, lo yeshafa. The din is that you don't cut them down. The owner of the land has no right to cut down the branches. Says the Gemara. Then it says, but anything that grows out of the trunk belongs to the owner of the tree, it's part of the tree. Anything that grows out of the roots, since it's like from the ground, belongs to the owner of the land. So what's the definition of roots and what's the definition of tree? What's considered roots? And menageza, what's considered a tree? Anything which grows, which is above the ground, that's considered roots. And anything which is sorry, skip the line. Anything which sees the sky, that's considered the trunk of the tree. If it doesn't see the sky, no, it's under the ground, then that's considered the roots. The question is, so why aren't you worried? Ilma maske adain. Some pronounce it shirtan with a shin, and some with sirtan with a sin. Basically, let's worry if we're going to say to the owner of the land, you cannot cut the branches down. So what happens if, let's say, the branches sort of come down and sand starts piling up, and then some of the branches suddenly come underneath the ground, and then it comes out from the other end. It looks like it's a whole new tree, because anything that's under the ground belongs to the seller, but and the branch coming out looks like a new tree. So one day the person who bought a single tree will come along and claim, I actually have bought 3 trees. But I look, there's an old tree coming out here, a sapling here, and therefore, as a result of that, I own all the land in between. Why are we not worried that this particular law that we made, that the owner of the land cannot cut the branches down, just has to let it grow and grow and grow, that eventually it's going to harm him? Says the Gemara, you sold me 3 trees, be easily out, and as a result, I have the land in between. Machlekes has to bring any proof to that or not, but nevertheless, it caused all kinds of headaches. El Rav Nachman, Yokes. What the Mishnah means to say is that the owner of the tree should be the one who should be cutting it down. For this very reason, we don't want to jeopardize or cause any machlekes between the owner of the land and the owner of the tree. Says the Gemara, and Rabbi actually says Yokes. He said what? That the owner of the tree should go ahead and cut down these extended branches. So it doesn't mean you should continue growing forever. That's not what we meant. We meant that it belongs to the tree, but he has a responsibility to cut them down from time to time. Rav Nachman now comes up with a new din and says, even though the Mishnah says that the branches from the trunk belong to the owner of the tree, but there's one exception, a palm tree. And the rule is that a palm tree has no branches. Now, why not? The Mishnah says all trees, the branches belong to the owner of the tree. Why buy a palm tree not? Thought perhaps the reason is there are branches growing there, but they don't belong to the owner of the tree because he's miyayish. What do you mean miyayish? What do you mean masir das? He removes it from his mind. Kivon, not miyayish, but masir das. Kivon the lemech, but the shorish goy. Eventually, what happens to a palm tree? We learned before that it gets uprooted. And you don't regrow it again. All other trees, if it starts drying or something, you cut the top of the tree down. The rest of by a palm tree, if it dries, the tree dies. So therefore, you're masir das from ever getting any branches. Yeah? That's why the branches don't belong to you. Either our branches in Metzias but you're Masir Dashamet. Because you're not going to regenerate the tree anyway. Masker with a papa says, what are you talking about? Well, koinish nealanas, if you buy, let's say, two trees, not three, two, we learned that if the tree dies eventually, you have to uproot it. And yet we just learned the Mishnah that all the branches belong to the owner of the tree. The Lemechel Mishnah's kaima is there to uproot it eventually. The branches belong to him. Elona papa, ain legezer the baldeka. There are no branches to the owner of the tree. Lefisha ain mighty gezer. You know what? In Mitzias, there are no branches really that grow out from the palm tree. And that's the reason why. Not because it's not common, very uncommon to have, by a palm tree, all the branches grow very high up. Very few branches, it's very rare that the branches start from the very low. Therefore, there's no branches to talk about. Says the Gemara. In fact, before we had to define what's considered a sapling or an aged tree, we said, if you climb with a rope to get the dates, because you don't climb with branches like you have on another tree, ordinary trees. Says him further. According to Rabzvi, Kashimashnis and Rabzvi said that there are branches of the palm tree. But our Mishnah says that all branches belong to the owner of the tree. I'm telling you there are no branches there. But you say there are branches, but it says in the Mishnah all branches belong to the owner of the tree. So it says, Amish is talking about a case with the Zabin L'Chabashanim. He went ahead and he bought the tree for 5 years. If he bought the tree for 5 years, a fixed amount of time, then even if the tree dies, he has a right to replant it because he's given 5 years. In that case, he's not Masir Das from the branches. In that case, he didn't give up hope from the branches because Rabbi said there are branches in the tree. And therefore, in that case, the branches belong to him. That's why Mishnah says, universally, all the trees, the branches belong to the owner of the tree. Then the Mishnah continued. Kona shloisha, if you bought 3 trees, then kona karka, you get the karka that's underneath the trees. And then we have a machlekes Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim, you also get the path to get to the trees. According to Rabbi Akiva, Moicha Bain Yafa Moicha, he gave you the path as well. According to Rabbanan, Moicha Bain Ram Moicha, you only have the trees, but you have to negotiate separately to get the path to go there. Says the Gemara, the Kama. So you say you get the land with it. Which land? How much land you get with it? What you get, tachten, all the land underneath the trees. So therefore they die, you can replant it. Ubeinein, the entire area between the 3 trees, and we'll see later what exactly distance the trees are allowed to be in. And the last thing is the chutzland. Even outside of the perimeter of these 3 trees, we give you some more space. And why do we give you space outside of the trees? In order that you'll be able to pick oida visala, the basket. Oida is when you're picking figs. It's called oida. And the Rashbam over here gives the correct word they use for every kind of picking. So oida is used for figs. He says the word boitz is used for grapes. The word koitz is used for grains. Goid is used for dates, and moisik is used for olives. In other words, they give you extra land beyond the tree, the perimeter of the tree, so that you can go out and climb up there and pick your fruits. Maskil Rabbi Loza asked the question. It seems, according to the Chachamim, that you don't get the path to get to the trees. What's more essential? If you can get to the trees, it's impossible. When it comes to picking, you don't have to necessarily be outside the tree. You can be underneath the tree. It'll be a little bit hard, more laborious, but you can eventually pick all the fruits. But no, so therefore, to save your tircha, we maybe give you some land outside. But the path is essential. Yet according to Chachamim, when you buy the trees, you don't get a path automatically. So why in the world would you get extra territory beyond the trees? Let's ask a question to Rabbi Yechon. If we don't give you the path, we're going to give you the right to go outside of the territory of your trees to be able to pick the fruits. The reason why we don't give you other road is because it's like what? We treat your trees like a separate land from the vendor. That's why in the world should the vendor give you part of his land to get to your trees? They give you extra territory beyond the trees, to which you're intruding into the portion of the vendor that we should give granted to you. On what basis? Based on the Chachamim, don't give you the derech. Surely we don't have to give you extra land to pick your fruits. Omer Rab Zayda digressing for a minute. Rab Zayda said, we know that Rabbi Lozer learned from from a few. He learned from Yechon, but he also learned from Shmuel. And if you remember, Shmuel actually paskened previously that the halach is like Rabbi Akiva, moiche ba'ayin yofa moiche. And yet Rabbi Loz's whole basis is that since we say moiche ba'ayin ra moiche, that the owner of the tree does not get the pad, derech, surely he shouldn't get the oil of the savai. That means that Rabbi Loza does not agree with Shmuel, and he holds that the halach is like a chamim, a digression. He made a comment, but David Abed Nimla, if I can learn from the words of Rabbi Lazar, that Shloisha, who the ain like that. Oh, sorry, before we get to that, I also learned a new halacha from Rabbi Lazar. A new halacha. That halacha, before we go to the digression, that halacha of Rabbi Lazar is the whole basis of Rabbi Lazar's part is that since you treat it, he gives a reason. You treat it like a separate property because you get 3 trees, you get with it land. Therefore, why should you encroach on the property of the vendor? So it seems I can infer from here. What about in the case where you're only buying 2 trees, but you don't get any land with it, and he sold you the right for the trees, then he did give you the right to get to the trees, because he didn't give you any land. You're not like a separate property. So you have since he sold you the rights to the trees, he sold you included in those rights are the rights to get there. So he makes a chiddush here. From the little extra, few extra words that he said, and that's svara, that we treat the 3 trees like a separate entity, a separate property. Only 3 there's no road. But 2 there is a road. Because he says to him, you gave me trees in your land. So therefore in your land you also have to give me a path to get to there. Now the Gemara makes a digression. It says, well, the whole basis for Rabbi Lazar is the fact that you don't get the derech. Therefore, why should you get the Erev V'Sala? And that's why he questions Rabbi Yechanan's halacha. Let us say, Rabbi Lazar, let's say the Shmuel Rabbi does not agree with Shmuel, because Shmuel said, Rabbi Akiva. And here he's saying that you have no derech, like the Chachamim. On Malay, he said to him, Lo im sukme masisik Rabbi Akiva. He said to him, no, Rabbi Loza is not making a mistake. In this case, it's clear Rabbi Akiva does not agree with our Mishnah. And since Rabbi Akiva does not agree with one halacha in our Mishnah, then our Mishnah is not Rabbi Akiva on the Chachamim. And therefore, Rabbi Loza is basing himself on the Chachamim because we're learning about this Mishnah. What is it about our Mishnah that does not conform with Rabbi Akiva's opinion? Rabbi Akiva says you're generally generous. Yet it says here in Hamilton, it says Higdilu, it says by 3 trees. What happens if the trees, let's say, grew beyond their allowance? Then Yeshapa, the owner of the land, is allowed to cut them down. Now, if you hold moicha ba'ayin yofa moicha, then not only you sold the trees, you also sold the trees, and also the branches can extend. The fact that the owner of the land can cut the branches down in the case where you sold 3 trees, clearly we don't believe in moicha ba'ayin yofa moicha. That's what Rabbi wants to say in defense of Rabbi Loza. Why cut it down? You're generous. You gave him the right to let the branches extend. Amalei, so Nachman Yitzchak said to Rabbi, no, Rabbi Lazar is definitely making a mistake because our Mishnah can conform with Rabbi Akiva as well. Could conform with Rabbi Akiva. Why could it conform? So why could the vendor cut it down? Because in this case, the vendor is being hurt. When does Rabbi Akiva say you're generous? But it doesn't really cause any harm. But then you're generous. But here the owner of the land is being harmed because by the branches extending, it's blocking out the sun and maybe blocking out the rain, so it's causing him harm. In this case, Rabbi Akiva is moida that you're not being be generous on your own cheshbon when it costs you. It's only when it's minimal. Here it's a significant cost. So our mission could be Rabbi Akiva, and yet Rabbi Loza says that 3 trees, there's no derech, which means Rabbi Loza is paskening like the Chachamim, that moicha ba'ayin ra moicha. Rabbi Akiva say you're generous, but you have boy but do so doesn't really weaken the ground. By a tree where it causes me harm, who's heard that? Rabbi Akiva in the case where the tree, my tree, the branches go into your field. You can cut down. If your branches are going into my field, I can cut them down so that I can be able to take my plowshares and stand in it and everything else and be able to go comfortably. I'm generous, but not in the case where it causes me harm. So in this case, it wasn't made a mistake. Says the Gemara Tanya, we actually learned that when you sell 3 trees, you get not only the area underneath and between, but also the area around it to be able to pick. And outside, the time it takes to pick the figs and the basket, not the time, but the place. You get extra land. That extra shetach of land, that extra portion of land, that now the buyer of the 3 trees has a right to put his ladders there and go picking. Who has the right to plant on that land? Like sort of who owns that land? Amalei said to Nisu, we learned by Klayim. The laws of Klayim are Oh, before we get to claims, it says hachitza in zerei sadeh. We learned in the following case. There are two gardens. There's an inner garden and there's an outer garden. The only way you get to the inner garden is by going through the outer garden. And we say that the outer garden gives the inner garden a path that you can get there. And nevertheless, who can plant on that path? Not the guy from the inner garden, but the guy from the outer garden. But it's still, even though the outer garden gave the guy the right to walk there, but that's it, just to walk, to pass over it, but not the right to actually own the land or to plant it. Same thing over here. The same thing over here. You have the little area around those three trees, so we'll pick it, but it doesn't mean that you own the land, and therefore the owner of the land can go ahead and sow. Abaye challenges Rabbi Yisrael. What are you comparing? Over there, let's say the person in the garden doesn't care if you want to plant. He just walks on it and goes to his garden. Over here, you gave me the three trees. I bought the three trees and I bought those for the land around it to be able to pick. If you're going to stop planting over there when my fruits fall down and they land on your seeds and get all messed up, and they're going to be ruined. So you're causing me harm. Maybe in this case, the Lakeach can obstruct and say, I don't want you to plant. Since I have the right to stand there and pick, and my fruits can be there, I don't want you to plant that area. Who's right? You are sullying my fruits. Ella, if you want to compare it, Ella, the Sefer. If you want, we compare it to the Sefer. What is in the Sefer of the Mishnah? It says with if, let's say, the guy from the outer garden gave there was a dispute, so they had to settle it. So the guy in the outer garden gave him on the side of his property, the side of his garden, a walkway to get to the inner garden. And because he gave it on the side of the property, neither of them have a right to plant on that property. Because in this way here, it sort of makes it a little bit more difficult for the guy in the inner garden to get there. And therefore we say, you know what? Neither of them have a right. And maybe that's the case of here as well. Because it caused me a little bit of harm, you shouldn't be planting in the area because my fruits will get sullied. Neither of them have the right to plant. Tani goes, but look at Abaye, but neither have the right to plant. Now the Mishnah Gemara continues, if the trees are too crowded, we say eventually you're going to pull them out because they can't survive. So that's not considered really what we're talking about. That you get the area between. It's not going to be permanent. If it's too disparate, too far away from each other, we'll say it's not a field of trees. It's just a tree here, a tree there. So what's the distance? Again, Rabbi Yisrael and Abaye. Rabbi Yisrael, here in this case it's Rav. Rabbi Yisrael named Yehuda Mishmol me'arba ames v'at shmeina. If it's less than 4 amas, eventually you're going to pull them out. And if it's more than 8 amas, it's too far away from each other. Between 4 and 8, exactly that distance. He says in the name of Shmuel, it's from 8 until 16 amas. Abaye said to Rabbi Yisrael, this is what Rava says is right in the name of Rav Nachman, and you shouldn't be arguing. No, it should be from 8 to 16 because we see this when it comes to client. By client, the din is that if you have an individual vine, you're not allowed to plant something next to it within 1 amma. But if you have a vineyard, then that has to be 4 amma. It has to be a much greater area. So it says over there, says the Gemara, you shouldn't argue in Nachman because we have a Mishnah like it between 8 and 16. It's not the Mishnah like him. It's not we learn Hanakei karma. If you're planting a vineyard, sheish esrei amma al sheish esrei amma, there's a gap of 16 ammas between one row of vines and the next row of vines. If it's 16 ammas or greater, and they have nothing to do with each other, it's like individual vines. So you can plant mutter lahavi zera l'sham. You can bring seeds in between them. Why? Because we don't combine the two together. So we see 16 ammas is what keeps them away, like Rav Nachman said. But if there's less than 16 amas, we'll consider it a vineyard. And you're not allowed to plant anything between them. And then, so this is a kilogram. And then Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda actually says, to prove this point, Maise b'tzalmin be'echad shenotas kama sheishes. Salmon, there was a person who planted 16 amas apart. And what he did was, he took the branches of the two vines, because the branches shouldn't, because the 16 amos from the vines itself, but the branches then come towards each other, make it less than 16 amos. So he pushed the branches in a different direction so that there's a gap of 16 amos in between. And there's a reyes anir. And then he planted something else, wheat, in the part that was not being used for vines in between, the empty part in between. So what do we see from here? That 16 amos is the distance that we say there's no link between the two, but less than 16 amos, they're connected as if it's a vineyard. Same thing with the trees here. Now, when are the three trees considered a sdei ilan? If they're within 16 amos of each other. Well, the following year, so he would swap every year. He would change the direction of which vines he would plant and the direction of the branches. And he would plant the area in between. And this story came from Chachamim, and they decided because it's 16 amos apart from each other, there's no problem here of a vineyard. And the reason why you have to take the branches and push them to the sides, because if they're extending towards each other, then it narrows the gap of the 16 amos. And you narrow the gap of the 16 amos, then you have a problem, and it's considered like connected. Clear ayah to Rav Nachman. Says Rabbi Yosef, I don't know about this particular story. I don't agree with it. I have another story. Why I say 54:8. The Duda de Rabbis in a city of shepherds was a company who came for Rabbi Yehuda. What happened was one guy sold to another guy 3 trees, and there was less than 8 amas in between. So all Rabbi Yosef really bringing a lie is that you said the minimum is 8. I'm bringing the minimum down to 4. Doesn't really bring a raya that the maximum is 8. Could be the maximum is 16 as well. So it came from Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei said, "Zil havle, you have to give to the person who owns the 3 trees. The tree, you have to give him kimlai. How much you have to give him? Kimlai boker v'kaleb. You have to give him enough to be able to work around the trees, to bring his cattle there and his utensils and equipment that he needs, all his implements to plant and to take care of the tree." So then he continues. So that's how much karka you have to give him. I didn't know how much. What are we talking about? I mean, a minimum distance between the trees, this distance, so that they can work the trees. Otherwise, you're going to pull them out. What do you call it? I didn't know what it was. I heard what it says in the Mishnah. A person should not plant a tree next to the field of his friend. Unless you distance yourself 4 amas. And we said, the Torah we learned, we're talking about if you want to plant a tree next to the field of your friend. You have to distance yourself 4 amas. You have to give the person enough distance to be able to work it. And we said, where's the cheshbon 4 amas come from? We said that's how much you need to be able to bring your animals and your equipment to be able to tend to your vines. So we see that the minimum area that you need for a tree or whatever is to survive is 4 amas. So I say shma mino kimloi boka v'kelo, when it says there that you should be able to bring your cattle there and your implements, we're talking about arba amas, 4 amas. So the minimum is 4 amas. According to Yosef, the maximum is 8 amas, because more than 8 amas like each tree individually. And according to Rava and Abaye and Nachman, it's up to 16 amas. But Nachman said starting minimum is 8 amas. The Rabbi Yosef says the minimum is 4 amas. We'll stop here. We'll continue tomorrow. Be well.